It is not women's secret hope or fantasy that when we leave, the house is in shambles. It is quite literally most women's nightmare, because it's not like they come home and these men are going to be like, oh, sorry, let me clean this up real quick. So they're going to come home and they're going to have everything to clean up and piece back together and put the house back to the way it was. That's not an enjoyment that you get to have of you go out with your friends or you go to an event and you enjoy something or fulfill your hobby, and then you come home and it looks like a tornado went through your house and the kids haven't been fed properly and the dogs haven't eaten and toys are all over the place and there's brown goldfish crackers under the carpet. That's not an enjoyable thing for anybody to come home and be like, oh, look how much my family needs me.
Welcome, everyone. This is Ekaterina Konovalova with Trust Me Mom, and my guest today is Abby Eckel. She's a content creator, educator, and advocate. I'm so excited to connect with Abby today because I've been following her on Instagram for a while, and she has a lot of very interesting content. I love her take on many social issues and women's empowerment. And definitely, as many working moms, I'm in a position where I found myself struggling sometimes, taking care of my family, working at my job, and juggling all these responsibilities. So Abby is one of these wonderful advocates who helps women to create more balance in their lives and create more equitable households. Abby, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me and following me and supporting it. I really, really appreciate it.
I'm excited to learn about your journey. What inspired you to start this advocacy and what fueled your passion?
Oh, gosh. Initially, it was like 7 years ago now. After my second son turned 1, I felt really lied to about motherhood. I felt like everything I had been seeing, all the influencers I had been seeing, their carefully curated lives and like only posting the good stuff and their cute coordinated outfits with their kids. I was like, this is such bullshit. And so I kind of set out to shed light and honest look at motherhood because I didn't really see that outside of Scary Mommy. And so I started creating content as like a quote unquote, like your quintessential mommy influencer. And was like, this doesn't feel genuine for me. And so in like 2020, when I think like everybody in the world got on TikTok, I got on to kind of explore it for a client and started creating content. And we had moved into our new house and we were outside with our neighbors and all the kids were playing outside and they were like, oh, is your husband working? And I was like, oh, no, he's inside making dinner. It's his week to cook. And they were like, it's his week to cook. And I was like, yeah, it's his week to cook and it's my week to put the kids to bed. And then next week we'll swap and I'll cook and he'll put the kids to bed. And they were kind of dumbfounded. They were like, 1, he cooks, and 2, he cooks for an entire week and he puts the kids to bed. And I was like, yeah. And there was a very glaring difference. And I realized that like when I started talking about that on TikTok, it went really viral. I realized very quickly that this was not the norm. And even though like I feel like I knew that that wasn't the norm, I didn't realize the extent of it. And I think it's one of those things that the more you learn about the inequities of marriage and motherhood and simply existing as a woman in the world, it never really ends. Like your educational journey about these things never really end because you gain more lived experience, you talk to more women, you exist online, unfortunately, and hear from lots of men and their thought process. And you just never really stop learning. And that's kind of what happened to me. I never stopped learning and I never shut up about it. So here we are.
I love it. Well, and I love that you're raising 2 boys and you are modeling a very different equitable relationship in your family. So can you share a little bit more how you show example with your family to your boys?
There aren't really I would say any like gender specific roles. I don't let my sons get away with anything. They're doing their laundry, they're cleaning up after themselves, they're loading the dishwasher, they see both mom and dad doing all of these tasks, whether they're quote unquote, feminine or masculine tasks, it doesn't really matter. We're all doing this. And that's always like the messaging that my husband and I are also sharing with them is that this is a family unit. Like we all live under this roof. We're all going to participate. It's everybody's job to keep the house clean. It's everybody's job. It's your own personal responsibility to take care of your own rooms and do your own laundry and have accountability and learn how to be an emotionally healthy, regulated human. So I'm not letting my kids get away with anything. I'm not treating them any differently. And granted, I don't have any girls really to compare how I would raise them to, but we're all participating. And that is the message that they will continue to hear and have always heard is that we all live under this house. We will all work together. We all should take pride in it. And that's that's kind of it. Like I'm not gonna you're not gonna pull one over on me and pretend like you don't know how to load the dishwasher or put the dishes away or where the dishes go. I think my oldest did that. He was like, I don't know where these dishes go. And I was like, you're going to learn. So that just tells me that you haven't done this enough. Now this is going to be like your job and your job only until you know where these dishes go. So he learned really quickly that that's that's not going to fly, you know, in this house. And we also, we read a lot of books with them to help them understand, like, be emotionally empathetic and intelligent, one, human beings, but two, boys specifically, which is really difficult these days. So we read a lot of books, we have a lot of conversations, we allow space for them to be curious about things, and it's a constant thing raising boys, let me tell you.
Oh, I can imagine. But also you have example how you don't let them have finished things. There was one example when you went to your mother-in-law house and how one of your sons wanted to just stack the cards and he didn't do it the right way. Can you share that example?
Yeah, he had played with these train tracks and it was time for him to put them away. Granted, this is like a really small box. I really don't know how all these tracks fit in there. But I told him, I was like, all right, you got to pick your tracks up and put them away. And my mother-in-law was like, be sure to like put them in there like lasagna. Well, he didn't listen and he was just throwing them all in there. And inevitably the box got full and they didn't all fit and there were still pieces laying out. And he got up and I was like, where are you going? This task is not finished. And he was like, no, it's okay, mom. Nana has her own Nana has her own way that she wants it done. That she wants to do it. Like the way I took it was that like Nana likes to do this and she has a way that she wants it done and so she'll just do it herself. And I was like, no, 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 no. I was like, come back and sit down. Nana doesn't want to do this. She doesn't find enjoyment in cleaning up after you. She does it because you didn't do it right the first time the way she told you was the best way to complete this task. So now you're going to sit down and you're going to dump the box out and we'll put them in there together like lasagna style. If you have questions along the way, I will be here to help you, but now you will complete this task. And he was like, okay. He doesn't really, there was no like fight or argument or pushback on it, but it was important in that moment because there were like two things that were happening. There was this idea that, and that we see it a lot as moms, like women enjoy doing this stuff. Like they have a specific way of doing it. And a lot of women will tell you that like, oh, it makes them feel better after they clean and they have anxiety around it of like a mess and chaos and clutter. And so they actually find, calming to clean and things like that. And that also somebody else would do it even if he didn't complete that task. And so it was, two lessons kind of in one there. So they know.
For sure. And then the same lesson, hopefully, adult men can learn where there is an idea for many of them that I think you also had a fun video where two men were talking on a podcast about how some women secretly hope that if they leave the house, that when they come back, it's a complete disaster and how husband failed without them. And they're like, well, they feel so important and significant. And how you shared that, no, it's their worst nightmare. So
Yeah.
can you share a little bit?
Yeah. I think men often project that. Like they want to leave and have things in shambles because they feel this need to feel needed, like to show, that the family needs them, or like if they lost their job because society still thinks of men as like the sole providers and like that's still what men's biggest and most important job is to provide, and that things would simply fall apart if they lost their job. And I think that in that particular clip was a lot of projection from men of because I think deep down they know that like they're not necessarily needed. Women would hold it down, but it is not women's like secret hope or fantasy that when we leave, the house is in shambles. It is quite literally most women's nightmare because it's not like they come home and these men are going to be like, oh, sorry, let me like clean this up real quick. So they're going to come home and they're going to have everything to clean up and piece back together and put the house back to the way it was. That's a punishment. That's not an enjoyment that you get to have of you know, go out with your friends or you go to an event and you enjoy something or fulfill your hobby and then you come home and shit has hit the fan. It looks like a tornado went through your house and the kids haven't been fed properly and, you know, the dogs haven't eaten and toys are all over the place and there's ground goldfish crackers into the carpet. Nobody wants to like, that's not an enjoyable thing for anybody to come home and be like, oh, look how much my family needs me. That is very much like, holy shit, what if something happened to me? Um, this is what my kid's life would look like if I wasn't here. And that very often is the main reason so many women stay in unhappy marriages because they are terrified of how little care, little proper care that their children would receive in their absence and in the time that they would be, you know, with their fathers for, you know, his time of custody or whatever. Like that's but I think a lot of times that's men's own projection of their own desires or their own fears.
Right. And you also had another clip where there is a shift in law where families, if they divorce, that there could be equal custody. And in fact, women will have more concern and anxiety that half of the time the child will not be taken care of properly.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. In
it kind of
Kentucky,
feeds
that was
to.
in Kentucky, yeah. I think there's a couple other states that have unfortunately implemented that now, and they wanna tout it as, like, this great thing to lower divorce rates, but the women know that it's not because they're staying happily married and this is suddenly, like, you know, something has drastically changed in their lives. It's out of pure fear that they are staying because they're terrified of the level of care that their children will receive in their absence.
Okay, I want to touch on another influencer and author and podcaster, Scott Galloway. And he made a big splash with the message that it meant to be empowering to women that when he looked at the data and women in their 30s and 40s, if they're not married, living with a cat or a dog, he would say they're fine. They will have fulfilling social life. They'll apply themselves professionally, engage with friends. While men, on the other hand, so there's that idea that, oh, poor Jane, she has 5 cats. Her life is doomed. She's fine, his message. But the guy in his 30s and 40s who is not married, on average, will be in a worse position because he's the one who will be engaged in all this conspiracy theories, browsing porn, and kind of socially less in a more favorable position. And it meant to be an idea that, well, look, this is great. Women should not be afraid not to be married by then. They should feel empowered. But you had even a more interesting take on it. So, can you share your perspective on it?
I think Scott Galloway is, for lack of a better term, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I think he sounds good. He sounds smart. He's, you know, educated, older white man who portrays this idea that he is dismantling patriarchal norms and ideologies and on the side of feminism. When in reality, his entire message is like, we just need men to get married. We just need men to partner with women. Because when men are single, they are destructive. They consume a lot of porn. They become violent. They become incels. They are essentially a danger to society. We must pacify them with women. And that's how you know when these like profound prominent, you know, male authors or, you know, come out with these think pieces like this is that it's all very topical. This isn't an individual issue. These are systemic issues, and he fails to address I feel most of these systemic problems in society that ultimately lead men to being lonely and isolated and violent. It is not that they won't be that way if they have women. Women, again, should not be given up and sacrificed for men's well being. It's just a continuation in a different way, packaged a little bit prettier because he's saying, oh, women are fine if they're single, which only touches on such a small issue of the larger pie and just continues to perpetuate misogynistic views to me.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah, because again, when I heard it the first time, I'm like, whoa, this is good. We're changing the narrative at least to stop shaming women who are not married in their 30s and 40s. So
Mhm.
we're making progress. And you added that next dimension, like, wait a second, but women are not designed to, as you said, pacify the aggression.
Mhm.
You can choose to be happy, and then guys can take care of their own needs.
Yeah.
So that was a fresh take.
It should not be women's job to make men less violent, to make men more successful, to leave their parents' households. Like, it's not our fault, and it's not the thing that we need to be working on doing to make men more successful again. That's not our job. It should not be placed on us. And the fact that he just missed that completely. I've seen what I needed to see.
Well, then let's give advice to families and women how they can create more balance in their lives. So in current environment, in our current economy, in our current state of the society, we're in the United States. So what can they do to improve their lives and have more harmonious relationships?
Get a divorce.
Is there
Listen, hear me out. No. That I mean, in a perfect world, I would say get a divorce. Because I fear, and I don't want to say like I know because there's always nuance here, but for I think most women in cishet marriages to men, obviously, it's not going to be different. There's no amount of communicating. There's no amount of books you can read, podcasts you can listen to, counselors you can see that are going to change somebody who has benefited greatly from the way things have currently been set up. You can't change the way your husband sees what you do. You can't make him see your worth. You can't make him see that or suddenly deem that what you do is important enough to want to help out with, to want to participate in. I get really irritated with this idea that if women just communicated better or found the right time or approached him differently or had more sex with their husband, that would be the thing that would make their husband suddenly want to step up and want to participate more equitably alongside of them. That doesn't exist. You cannot communicate your way into having a better husband. Again, this is solely on men to work through themselves, to understand, to see the worth that their wives provide them that might not be financially, Otherwise, you're beating a dead horse. And there's nothing that you can do if somebody else doesn't see what you're doing as important as what they do or as worthy of wanting to participate alongside you.
Well, let's provide an example with Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, which is an interesting example. It sounds like she was quite vocal recently about some of the challenges they had. And I didn't even realize that she was ready to divorce him. Carrying this invisible labor, mental load, all the work she's been doing while he was doing the important political campaigning, and she held the fort at the house, managing the household. And obviously, they both were highly educated. So this is the trap where a lot of modern women fell into, where we all go to college, pursue education, are given this idea that, well, we're all equal, we're all smart. We start building a career, and then at some point you get married and start having children, and that's when things change dramatically.
Mhm.
And typically, the default caregiver is the woman. And naturally, even though there are some different studies, there is some data where it's a learned skill versus biological skill. So I'm not sure if where I'm gravitating here, whether it's biology versus learned. But right now, the empirical data shows you that mostly women take care of the babies and raise the kids. It becomes very skewed towards women taking the lion's share of raising the children, taking care of the household, and having a huge amount of invisible labor that is never ending coordination. On top of that, we have lower levels of serotonin in our brain. So there's more negativity, more that circular thinking. And over time, this beautiful fairy that the husband fell in love with when he was dating turned into this really tired workhorse, basically. And then he's confused why. And then I left the example, again, based on the data and information was available publicly shared by Michelle Obama, how she had the divorce papers ready and presented it to Barack. And she said that this is where we are. And his reaction was that, oh, I didn't realize how much you've done. He followed her, trying to document everything she's been doing. He learned the tasks. He started helping with children, attending their school, um, whatever they needed to do with school or doctor appointments. So it sounds like, and I believe they started therapy after that, and they kept it every week. So if the president of the United States was not immune to it, I can imagine how many households in the United States also might be struggling and might benefit from this kind of reassessment.
Yeah. Patriarchy does not discriminate against anybody. And those gender norms really rear their ugly head, particularly after you have children, because there is truly nothing that can prepare you for things. You might think that your husband is such a feminist and very, big on egalitarian marriage. And then you have a child and watch how quickly that changes. There is still, I don't know what it is. And I know there's like some studies about like, it's very minimal around like why that happens, particularly after children. But it is the hardest, the hardest change because as women, we change so much so. And I think most of it is societal conditioning of like, this is my job. I birthed this child. I am possibly feeding this child from my own body. But the other part of it too is that men also go through societal conditioning of like, you just do what she says. That's it. Like just do what she says and follow her lead. And we know very quickly as women that that's how we get very resentful of like this expectation that I simply just know and am naturally better at it, that I have this biological wiring that's different than yours. And in reality, for me, I think it's a lot more societal conditioning of, men take the back seat, women lead in terms of childcare and child rearing and running the household and things like that. But we give up so much when we become mothers. We give up our bodies, we give up more freedoms, we give up wages, we give up promotions. The motherhood tax is very real. The wage gaps are very real. And I think a lot of it is because men's experience in the world is the default experience. They don't have, they can't empathize with anybody else's experience because the world was built off of that default experience. It was not built to empathize and understand what women go through. So men, I think most of the time, doesn't even cross their mind to try to understand what she's going through, to really fully grasp what their wives are saying to them and trying to come to them and saying, I am drowning here. I simply cannot keep up anymore. And it's terrible that it usually comes to that fever pitch of like, I'm out. I simply cannot go on anymore. I am resentful of you. I think of you differently. I view you differently. That's a really hard thing to come back from. it's a really hard thing, even harder, I think, for a man to step up in that moment. Grateful that Barack did it, grateful that my husband did it. But I fear most men do not have it in them because most men don't have the emotional intelligence and empathy to hear that plight from their wife and not internalize it as like an individual personal failure of themselves and then automatically just get defensive and refuse to acknowledge and take accountability for any part that they had in where things in the relationship are right now.
Mhm. Yeah. You had another really good example on your Instagram. You typically work with women, and there was one
Mhm.
man who reached out and you asked him a few probing questions, and he didn't even realize what was the expectation from his wife. And I think we can transition to the idea of centeredness or being centered on men. So, can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. Men have always been centered. It's similar to the default experience. Men are always at the center, whether they believe it true or not. We know that they are because this world was literally built by them, for them, on the backs of women, on the ideas of women. But they don't even they don't even realize it. And this was like the perfect example. He was talking about how they had initially had this agreement that he would go to work and she would stay home and care for the house and raise the children. And that was mostly working fine until the kids had gotten, a little bit older and were in school now. And she was like, I'm going to start my own business. And the business was successful. And he felt like she was no longer keeping up her end of the agreement. And I was like, well, did you have a conversation when this changed about like what both of your expectations were going forward now that things were not really how you had initially agreed? And he was like, well, no. And I was like, okay, might be a good place to start. And he was talking about his, expectations for connection. He was like, I just want to be able, like, I just want to hang out with her sometimes and us not be on our phones and have conversation and, talk more. And I was like, is that what connection feels like for you? And he was like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, what does connection feel like for your wife? Well, I don't know. And he quickly realized I was like, that he was talking at her, not with her. But that's the thing. Men constantly, and he felt like he was not part of the men that I refer to, and that he was, more egalitarian and more caring and more emotionally aware and intelligent and empathetic. And most of these men think that way until you start poking holes in that idea. And you're like, actually, you don't ask your wife anything. You don't engage with her. It is, what do I want? Why are my needs not getting met? Why is my expectation, not why is she not bending to my expectation anymore? And they never think to like ask anybody else, their wives, not just anybody else, but their wives, what their needs are, what connection looks like for them. How do they see things changing in their marriage and relationship? And how should things, progress going forward? It is me, 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 me. And they're always at the center of a relationship. And it's so deeply conditioned that they don't even realize it until you start prompting them, until you start pushing them. And then they really don't like it. It's a really uncomfortable feeling to be told that like you're actually really self-centered. um, because then those defenses kick in and they're like, wait a second, I don't like the way you're, making me out to be. But more often than not, they are the center of their relationships and in their lives. It should be always about them. And they don't even realize that they do it.
Yeah, it reminded me of a funny joke where a husband complained about how his wife turned into this not very attractive kind of grumpy woman, and a person replied to him on Twitter that, well, before when I met her, she looked so beautiful and gorgeous and she was so kind of easygoing. And the person replied to him that, yeah, before she met you, her parents took care of her. And now you took care of
Now
you're the one to blame.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's true. They put all of this pressure onto women. I had this conversation in my comments earlier when I was talking about how, like, I shared spicy pics with my husband the other day, and then life happened. Like, he went to this meeting, this ceremony for like hours, and I was here. Like, the kids came home, they needed snacks, I needed to make dinner, I had to, tidy before the cleaners came. I had uh, a collaboration that landed in my inbox that needed to be done in the next couple days. And it was like all of this shit. And this guy was like, and naturally, my husband and I sat down at like 10:30 at night after I had got our oldest to bed, and he had put our youngest to bed, and he was like, "So slip into that little number again?" And I was like, "No." And the man in my comment section was like, "Looks like you're putting everybody else's needs before your husband's needs." And I was like, "Do you not see?" And not that my husband did this, because he didn't, but men will put everything on their wives and then get mad when they are not the center of attention. I expect you to cook all the meals and take care of the kids and run this household, and then why are you not sleeping with me? Why am I not a priority anymore? How are you that effing selfish, man? Like, how do you not understand this? It is so frustrating.
Well, part of it can stem from the idea, and we may go a bit controversial right now with maybe some religious programming where women need to submit to their husbands.
Mhm.
And there is a very large percentage of population that may take that idea and maybe use it
Mhm.
in a way that maybe in an ideal world, if man treats wife as Christ treats her as a church, right? And puts her needs first,
Mhm.
and then she submits to him, then it works out.
Mhm.
But in reality, it rarely happens.
Mhm.
So the submit to your husband part works, but treat your wife as church doesn't. And that's
Mhm.
where disconnect happens.
Yeah.
But that programming is pretty deep.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure it contributes a lot to the challenge we're discussing right now.
I think so too. Definitely think religion and purity culture is very, very deeply, I think, ingrained in so many of us.
So what can we do to I don't like the idea of just get a divorce because I'm still naively optimistic. Maybe in a few years it will change, but I still hope that we can turn things around. I love that you are raising your boys in a different way. And of course, there's a way to change every generation. And with each new generation, a progress is happening. But what can we do right now in our existing marriages, in our existing relationships to change the narrative and change the overall trend in the society where the entire family feels more fulfilled and harmonious?
I tell women the most to start centering themselves. This is going to feel really uncomfortable for men, and this really actually tends to create a lot of friction. So it's hard when you are in a marriage that is very lopsided, where you are carrying the most, where you have asked, time and time and time again for change and for participation, and you are not receiving it. In those instances, my advice to women, and they either can't divorce, which is most women. Most women are not going to get a divorce. They can't afford it. They can't, whether they have, a child with special needs, or um the price alone of living alone, of getting a divorce is extremely costly. And for most women, it is to focus on themselves. It is not going to be fulfilling. And for most women, it is not going to better their marriage to continue to work on it as a whole when you are the only one working on it. I tell women to center themselves, to start prioritizing their needs, even if it's inconvenient for other people and their family, which is very difficult because as women, we feel this need to put everybody else above ourselves. And then we get resentful of everybody else because they're not treating us the same way that we treat them and our family. And so it really is, but it's in small ways. It's finding a place in your house that is just for you. The entire house is shared. You're a mom. You can't go to the bathroom alone. We know this. So where is the area in your house that is just for you? Maybe it's a desk, maybe it's a guest room, maybe it's a place in the garage, whatever it might be that is just for you, that you have, control over, that you get to, put things out that represent you, that bring you happiness and joy. It's finding a hobby that you like. It's getting involved in your community. It's, reconnecting with other people. It's as simple as making a meal that you like, even if everybody else in your family hates it. Setting the thermostat to like your preferred setting. All of these really simple ways that we don't realize how we're centering everybody else in our lives are very simple ways, but really impactful ways to start centering our needs again, to really allow us the space to find who we are again, to find that joy, to find fulfillment outside of being a wife and a mother. And that will spill over into our children. And that will inevitably probably create friction between you and your spouse because they will recognize they're not being centered anymore. And most don't like that. But this is about you. This is about you finding fulfillment and happiness and doing what you feel you can do in this moment in your current, status of your relationship.
Yeah, it almost feels like growing up, getting out of codependency and feeling really firm on the ground
Mm-hmm.
and being fine no matter what.
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely hard.
That was very inspirational. Thank you, Abby.
You're so welcome.